So I want the listener to really listen to what you said, and it's such a profound statement. I mean, obviously, it kind of goes back to what you're saying. Most people in the industry, they're analytical, but like earlier on, I said like you have this feng shui way of talking about these topics, almost kind of like maternal, but at the same time, you're very like distinct in the definitions and the details of what you're talking about. So it comes across like kind of like almost like sound waves, like literally it's like sonogram ways, and then like it's almost mesmerizing. So I could definitely see part of your success is part of the way you deliver that information as well. So I want to talk about like historically, like obviously now you're growing these three young bosses. Okay, I'm not going to leave off Leaf. Leaf is the boss and a half, right? And,
Right.
and yourself and your husband. But I mean, like were your parents, were any of them entrepreneurs? Are you getting any of this boss genetics from them, or is it something that you just grew into on your own?
That is a big, big part of my story. And not just my parents, were entrepreneurs. When I was growing up, there were at least two businesses, that they were running in the household, but my aunts, uncles, grandparents on both sides, like entrepreneurship does run in my family very strongly.
Mm,
And so you might hear that and be like, oh, you were just born into it. Mm, mm-mm. No, it was not an easy childhood. My story, my age 0 to 7 story is that we had so little
mm,
that we had nothing is what it felt like when I was very young. When we lived in a trailer, we were on food stamps frequently. There was not a lot of money. And what we did have, it was like we had when we did have money, when it started to get better, my dad, both of my parents, my dad worked very hard. I remember very clearly when I was probably 3 or 4 years old, he worked 3 jobs. So he had a painting business where he was painting. That was the business, was residential repaint, inside, outside in Phoenix, Arizona. Very, very hard work. He also drove a cab and delivered pizza in the evenings. Like they were working very, very hard.
mm,
And so part of my money story that I've had to overcome in my life is that idea that yes, you can do whatever it is that you want to do, but it's going to be hard.
mm,
Like you're going to be working really hard and, you know, it's very stressful, right? Money is hard to make and it's hard to hold on to. Those were two of the core ones for me. And so what that actually did was put me 100% off of entrepreneurship.
mm.
And actually that story of being self-employed, mm, here's the here it is with my dad and with his brothers,
Mm.
is that they were basically unemployable, that they couldn't get along with people well enough to be employed. Right. And so that was also one of the stories that would come up. And that, again, in my lineage, that, oh, yeah, there's just like a stubborn streak. Um, and self-employment is really hard, and it's really hard on a marriage, and it's really hard on a family. Those are the stories that I hear. So when I was growing up, when I was at the age of like people asking me what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a teacher or a bank teller. Circling it back, I wanted stability,
Mm.
9 to 5, right? Like holidays off, right? I'm going to get a paycheck. Everything's going to be stable. I'm going to teach. So those two, it's funny that those were my two dream jobs, being a teacher, being a bank teller. Um, but it felt like a lot of stability to me, while at the same time, that drive to create, that drive to do something for myself was also always there, which is apparent from what we talked about before with, building my flute studio, teaching private flute lessons. And when I was in college, so I built that private flute studio. I taught flute lessons. I also worked at the auditorium, helping with the lights and the soundboards and the setup. And I also worked at Eddie Bauer in the mall over the summers. I painted, literally painted dorms, like on the painting crew. And I was working really, really, really hard all the time.
mm,
So when I switched into um, financial services, I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio right now. We originally moved to Cincinnati for my husband to go to graduate school at the University of Cincinnati back in 2007. And that's when I moved into financial services and financial planning specifically. And that was the point that was the first point where I was like, I'm going to dedicate everything. So I'm not going to do any extra stuff. I'm going to dedicate everything to this profession. Right. So I didn't have multiple jobs.
mm,
I took the mindset of like all the stuff I could be doing, I'm going to focus. I'm going to focus on this one thing. And it wasn't until about maybe 9 years in that I started getting really bored, that I was doing the same thing over and over. And I was like, I can't see myself. I couldn't see myself doing that for another 6 months, let alone like another, I don't know, 40 years or whatever. And I knew I was that drive, that call to be an advisor, was like, I got to create my own. I need to have my own client relationships. I need to be the one building for myself. Like I felt that really strongly. But so this was back in 2017, but I was still scared. I was still scared of going out on my own because I knew, quote
mhm,
unquote, that it was going to be too hard. It was going to be too hard to do it on my own because of the examples that I had seen over and over again with my family. And we don't have to go into that whole story of why I left, but I did end up leaving. I came to the conclusion in 2020, from 2019 to 2020, that I was not going to be able to build the business that mattered to my heart in the way that I wanted to build it at the place I was at.
mhm,
And I had to create it. I had to create it on my own. Um, and so that's what I did. So I leapt into entrepreneurship. I trusted myself that I had the skills. I'd been in at that one job for almost 13 years at that point, building, building and building all of the skills, all the knowledge, all the credibility, everything that I needed.
mm,
And I trusted and I leapt. And my journey through entrepreneurship so far has just been like the most exquisite, painful, joyful, confusing, infuriating, amazing journey of understanding myself.
mhm,
And what I've found over this time is that the more I understand me, the more deeply I understand me, the more deeply I understand my feelings and my things that activate me, that translates exactly
mm,
for my
mm.
clients.